Okay, I think we can probably get started now. Thank you all for coming and attending. This is part two in our three-part series about the U.S. Patient Access Rule and how it impacts the healthcare technology landscape. Part one was an introduction and high-level overview of what the Patient Access Rule is, how it came to be, the regulatory requirements, and some of what the Karen Alliance has done to promote industry standards for implementation. If you missed part one, don't worry, I think you'll still get a lot from this discussion. And we'll provide a link to that video in case you want to catch up later. In this session, we're going to explore some of the possibilities to utilize the data being made accessible through the rule and how that might be used in digital healthcare innovation. Okay. Quick intro. I am Mark Hughey, Principal Consultant at Arcweb Technologies. Prior to doing digital product development work with Arcweb, I spent about a decade doing government consulting work at the Department of Health and Human Services. So lots of technology projects at various HHS agencies. So long long career history in the healthcare field. And for the Q&A, we'll be joined by Chris Sierra, CEO of Arcweb, and also a dedicated student of healthcare interoperability. He's been focused heavily on defining Arcweb's contribution to digital health innovation. So thanks for joining us, Chris. Just a quick recap of part one to set the stage for today's discussion. The Patient Access Rule is the result of HHS agencies implementing mandated provisions from the 21st Century Cures Act, which was signed into law in 2016. The primary regulatory teeth, so to speak, is provided by Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, using its authority to regulate Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, CHIP, and qualified health plan issuers on federally facilitated exchanges. In partnership with the ONC, the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, CMS has enacted the rule to address the lack of seamless data exchange in healthcare, which has historically detracted from patient care, leading to poor outcomes and higher costs. Now, what this boils down to is that all government-controlled plans falling under the purview of CMS, which accounts for healthcare coverage for 1 out of every 3 Americans, roughly, is required to make the patient data they collect accessible on public APIs, so patients can access and share it on digital products and platforms of their choosing. Third-party app developers now have the ability, via this rule and this capability, to pull data from payers on behalf of their patient users. This extends the existing mechanism of patients utilizing their HIPAA right of access to include third parties chosen and authorized by the patient. The rule actually specifies 3 APIs. In addition to the patient data focus, there are also API mandates to provide a directory of the payer's providers and their formulary information. Access to patient information requires authentication by the patient user using their payer account credentials. And once authenticated, the APIs must supply a refresh token good for at least 90 days enabling third-party apps to continue collecting relevant data. And wrapping up our recap is the US Core Data for Interoperability data model. US CDI is the data format standard required by the rule. All data a payer has needs to be made available in this format. And this gives a glimpse into the types of data that are available to third-party apps acting on behalf of their patient users. Okay, so what can we do with all this data is the question. So we're going to explore some of these possibilities. This is a whole, list of sort of different areas where we see possibilities, and we've got some specific use cases we'll dive a little bit deeper into. But generally, once the patient user has authenticated, you now have access to all of their past data. So that immediately enables the ability to conduct retrospective analysis, right? Looking backwards, does this patient have a relevant diagnosis, or a diagnosis that we're interested in assisting with in our third-party app? Is the patient user being treated for that diagnosis? Are they adhering to the treatment plan? Are they, going to their visits? Are they taking medications? We'll talk a little bit more about that, but this gives you an ability to paint a picture, sort of a patient journey. Where are they in their health? And there's interesting ways that we can use not only current data, but also, potentially data that comes later to help offer services or, prompt behavior change in a patient that leads to better health outcomes. So recall that the refresh token specification is 90 days minimum. So that allows you, once the user has authenticated once, it allows you for 90 days to be able to conduct proactive analysis as well, right? We can continue to listen in, so to speak, to future claims and clinical data that may provide valuable insights and facilitate interventions or other patient experiences that we want to present through our app. We can do that in real-time reaction to data as it becomes available. So let's dive into some specific use cases just to help illustrate the point, and look at some of what is possible. First use case is on preventive care. So preventive care has become a major concern for providers, payers, and there's a deep focus by healthcare innovators in this space as well, which presents a significant opportunity to reduce costs and improve patient outcomes across the entire healthcare system. Technology that enables and encourages preventive care is also a major source of investment, with the global preventive healthcare market expecting to reach $287 billion by 2027. Now, current preventive health programs have found success in changing patient behavior, but they really rely on individual targeting. The payers or providers need to identify specific patients. A lot of times that's based on demographic information, especially with regards to preventive care, and to be able to encourage those users to receive the necessary preventive care to keep them healthy, to keep them out of the hospital. The patient access API could provide really a comprehensive view of a user's preventive care needs, because the claims data that would be made available through the API indicates what visits have been billed. It also indicates which ones are still needed. We'd be able to do that type of gap analysis that would help reduce duplicate messaging, improve the effectiveness of reminders and communication that goes out to patients to encourage them to take the preventive care needs that are relevant to them. It's also true that preventive care recommendations change based on age and other demographic data, and other specific health conditions. So if a third-party app has a compelling user experience that continues to draw that patient user in, which would help facilitate maintenance of that refresh token life, we can continue monitoring for changing conditions that might warrant new care recommendations, or changes to what the app suggests. So in this case, access to data helps us achieve really the promise of preventive care, ensuring that patients receive the recommended care while reducing and improving outcomes. And we can do that in a context-informed way and deliver those informations and those suggestions and those prompts to go get the preventive care at the right time, under the right circumstances. Moving on to our second use case, medication adherence. Huge problem. Almost a third of all prescriptions go unfilled, while only about half of all patients actually follow their provider's directions for chronic disease-related management medications. This medication non-adherence is another major driver of healthcare costs and negative outcomes, causing 10% of all hospitalizations and leading to 125,000 deaths a year. Just really sobering statistic. And historically, providers have not had complete visibility over patient behavior. Your insurer knows if you filled a prescription, but your doctor does not. And claims data, and now we're looking at access to this claims data via the Patient Access API. The claims data is really the best indication that you have filled a prescription, but providers just haven't had easy access to that in the past. And this is now, through the rule and its provisions, becoming much more mainstream. The same challenge actually applies to a lot of existing apps. If you think about sort of medication reminder apps and things like apps that are designed to help a patient user manage their medications. They really rely on data entry by the user. The user has to figure out what medications they're taking, which is very confusing, obviously, with the medication names. So that data entry really, and all of that self-reporting that those types of apps rely on are rife with errors. There's a lot of error-prone user experience there. And those things really focus very much on, those apps serve to create reactive solutions that only often cover a single medication. But again, having access to the data will enable, very personalized recommendations and potentially interventions that can significantly improve outcomes. Because the data set contains prescription information, patient access API integration could turn these medication adherence apps from reactive to proactive tools. Because an app using the API would know once your prescription is filled, enabling you to trigger reminders for taking medications, and all this would happen automatically, as well as refilling the medication at the appropriate time. Now, data back to the providers isn't really covered by the patient access API, but obviously solutions could be architected to enable, now that we have this data, we could report this data back to providers about whether prescriptions have been filled, which would potentially even save lives by alerting providers if essential prescriptions haven't been filled or refilled. We know a bit about that maintenance and history with the patient and their medications. Also true, through the API, the medication information is sufficiently detailed. We've also got access to the payer's formulary. I mentioned there's a separate formulary API that lists all of the medications that are covered by that plan. You can also get different medication tiers. So, based on cost, there are different tier levels that would facilitate all kinds of, cost analysis or even, direct purchasing options for covered medications directly from the app. And because the data includes information on all medications, really a single app could cover medication adherence for any given condition, all again without relying on the user to enter the details of their medications. For our next use case, let's look at the flip side to preventive care and talk about solving problems for managing care after procedures. One study that was based on 2018 data found that only 39% of post-operative visits for major procedures occurred. Minor procedures with a 10-day follow-up window were even worse at a meager 4%. So using the patient access API to detect whether a follow-up encounter occurs within the expected window for a patient's procedure would enable intervention experiences, surfacing educational resources that communicate the importance of follow-up care and triggering reminders that help drive the desired behavior. Through other integrations, again, back to providers, compliance data could be routed to providers to help focus attention on the patients that need the most help. And like our other examples, understanding what is happening with the patient when they are outside the hospital or provider's office enables powerful intervention tools that could dramatically cut hospital readmissions, another leading cause of negative outcomes and healthcare costs. So I realize I'm running out of time. I'll try to get through the next use case, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Now, while the first three use cases that I went through were kind of specific to certain challenges of patient care, this use case looks at things from the developer's perspective. So that's maybe cheating a little bit in terms of presenting use cases, but I thought this is really useful to point out because on a routine basis, I get calls from some prospective client. They've got an app that's poised to revolutionize healthcare, and there's just this one tiny little detail that they need help with. How do I get patient data in the patient's medical record that I need for my app, to do its thing? And my answer is always, a fairly unsatisfying, it depends. What data do you need? What EHR system is it? What hospital system or provider organization is it? Because they all have their own implementations of the EHR. They have their own EHR management teams and integration policies and standards. And yeah, it's a bummer. You're going to have to implement and maintain integrations with every one of those that you want to do business with. However, for numerous, specific use cases, we can get some of that same data available from the payer, now accessible via the Patient Access API. And because this is a standard mandated by regulation, and the payers are required to offer comprehensive developer education resources and support, the barrier to entry is significantly lower. And since the data comes from the payer, which spans any provider organization the patient uses, you can get the data from a single source for each patient. Now, we mentioned came up in the Q&A from part one of the series that you'd still need an integration for each payer, but that's a much smaller universe than trying to maintain integrations with lots of different health systems or hospital systems that you're trying to maintain connection with. And as I mentioned earlier, the payer's support of this API and its maintenance and the developer's use of it is part of the rules requirement. This isn't a cure-all, though, for EHR integration woes. Many of those prospective clients I talk to need to get the data produced by their app back into the medical record to have any hope of the provider using their product. And an app using this approach wouldn't be able to serve patients not covered by the CMS regulated payers, which are the ones that are required to follow the rules provisions. But EHR vendors are certainly not immune to regulatory pressures. So, perhaps we're going to see an expansion of these patient access API type provisions to include EHR vendors or providers at some point in the future. That is about the bulk of the presentation. That's all I've got. So before we jump into the Q&A, just a quick word on who we are and what we do. Arcweb does strategy, design, and development of custom software. We've been a trusted partner to over 80 companies across 200 plus projects, launching new products or introducing new technology that creates business value. You can connect with us in all the ways you'd expect, and we are routinely publishing relevant and insightful content on our website at arcwebtech.com. So give that a look if you haven't already. So with that, we can move into the Q&A. I know we've got Chris available on the call as well. So if you've got any specific use cases of your own that you're curious about, I'd love to hear about them.
So we have one question from the audience, Mark, and I will mention if anyone else has a question you want to submit, you can. Just got one from Jim actually. So I was just going to say you can drop it right into the Q&A panel and we will address it. So Mark, the first question is from Jim actually. Says trying to find decent documentation on FHIR. There's a lot of it, but on first blush, it's not terribly informative. Is there a Swagger open API doc somewhere that I am missing?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know Chris has been super, plugged into stuff that's been happening in the FHIR world, and even doing some hacking of his own. Do you have any information on that, Chris?
Jim, I'm not sure about Swagger and Open API docs. Most of the information that I tend to get is on the hl7.org site, hl7.org/fire. I'm guessing you've been there and seen it before. I'm not aware of anything better at this time, but I'll make a note and I'll try to see if I can find something better, and I'll definitely reach out to you afterwards.
Thanks for the question, Jim.
So we have another question here, which is, will regulations mandate the same level of data sharing from providers and EHRs?
Yeah, well, so that was sort of what I was touching on there at the end of the EHR integration case. And we don't know for sure. There's a recent announcement that healthcare providers were going to need to make some of the the same information available by the end of this year. There was like a December 31st date that was floated out, and we're honestly still investigating it because the wording is kind of vague in terms of who it actually applies to. The government has I mentioned that ONC organization. They've got some standards out there, and there's a health information program that folks can opt into to essentially become a certified, IT. I forget what the specific label is, but it's basically a program that I think you can opt into. Now, where the interesting part is CMS going to use their weight as a payer, to sort of force or encourage participation in that program.
Just mention a couple things too. So there's I'll post here in the chat the ONC timeline that's on healthit.gov. So you're welcome to peruse their site. And this is some of the highlighted regulatory dates. And there is something called EHI export capability that's supposed to be available starting 12/31/2023. That's different than what Mark was just referring to, but the EHI export does allow you to get population level export capability out of the EHRs, and certified EHRs, meaning the Cerners, the Epics, and anyone that's getting reimbursement from the government has to comply with that specific date. One difference though with what the mechanism here, this has an OAuth that's patient level. And so the patient authenticates and authorizes the third-party app to utilize it. The EHI export is different in that it's really only for business associates of the health system already. So it is a little bit different, but I wanted to mention it because it is going to be an important mechanism for getting population health data out of the EHRs in a standard way.
I know we're a minute over time, but I just saw another question. So we'll try to quickly get to that. How long until you think this kind of functionality expands to non-government plans? I know we actually mentioned in the first webinar that Humana, for example, not subject to the provisions of the rule, but went ahead and volunteered to comply with them and has been involved in a lot of the industry discussions for how to standardize the implementation for this. So I'm not sure, Chris, whether you know anything additional with regard to specific, weight, that might actually be applied to those.
Yeah, it's really just an advocacy effort. So Humana went ahead and made all their ERISA plans available with the Patient Access API, which is a noble, and I'm grateful for that endeavor. So it's an advocacy effort to try to get other payers in their ERISA plans to do it. It does require them to pay, to make these services available. So I don't think it's an easy one, but that is presently where we are. It's more of an advocacy effort.
Yeah. Well, thanks, folks, so much for the questions and attending. I appreciate it. As I mentioned, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. Part 3 is going to be a panel discussion. We've got some experts in the field that are sort of starting to implement these types of provisions, or interested in how to use this data and innovation. So I think we're going to have a really powerful and interesting conversation So keep an eye out for invites to that and information on how to join. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it. Take care.